Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Business Brew. I'm your host, Bill Brewster. I'm happy to be joined by Aaron Edelheit today. As a reminder, this is for entertainment purposes only. Nothing here is an invitation or solicitation to buy or sell any security mentioned. As always, you're encouraged to do your own due diligence and assume that this is all opinion-based and, do your own work. That's the general rule here. So, with that said, Aaron, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. I don't know why you didn't start the podcast with you warning me that you were going to take off your shirt. I think that would have been a great beginning to the podcast.
It would have been. Maybe I'll get shirtless at some point. There's only so many more layers to, take off here. So how's everything going?
Be a totally different niche of financial podcasts.
It would certainly be interesting. I think that's not really what people are coming here for. This body isn't. It's not primed to do marketing in that way.
No, for sure. No, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm excited.
I've followed you for a while. I've read some of the stuff that you've done. I really like how enthusiastic you are right now about opportunities because, we're at a part in the market when I think it's very easy to look at valuations and say like, there's nothing to do. And, you're tweeting about things that you see going on in Mexico, and we connected over weed stocks and sort of that whole thesis. So I think it's really cool to see somebody that's got, like a value you call yourself Aaron Value, and here you are pushing yourself to find, interesting ideas still, when I think a lot of traditional value people are probably a little bit down and saying, everything's expensive if they're only paying attention to the US. So
yeah, I feel like a kid in a candy store. I think once you get past the top 200 or 300 US companies in terms of market cap, I'm frankly overwhelmed by opportunity. I see a lot of opportunity in international stocks. I see a lot of opportunity in smaller companies, and specifically where we connected was around US cannabis stocks that, because of regulatory reasons, actually trade in Canada. And so you have the way I'm viewing the world is, when I first started, very soon after I started professionally managing money, I went through not only the long-term capital management collapse, but then led to the dot-com. And I think we're seeing a sequel to 99, 2000, where you have extreme valuation concentrated, and that my best years were actually 2000 to 2002, and when that bubble burst. And I think that you have extreme concentration in US companies, especially tech. You can see it in anything electric vehicle, SaaS stocks, and that once you go a little bit off the beaten path or go outside the US or some of the frothy markets, I think you can find exceptional companies that are growing or have the potential to grow and invest. And I'm really excited. But I should warn you that, my mentor, who's a very, very successful investor, always says your greatest strength is your greatest weakness. So I should warn you in advance that
That's fair.
I easily get excited. So
yeah, I like that saying. I guess that the other side of that is, I think that if your greatest strength is also your greatest weakness, then some could also say that your greatest weakness can be somewhat your greatest strength. And it reminds me, I've mentioned it a couple times, but Tim Ferriss and Josh Waitzkin were talking about how they think that people's superpowers and their weakness and sort of like their weaknesses are very closely linked. It's an interesting concept.
I completely agree. And it's one of the things I've always been interested in investments in business. I don't know why. But as I've gotten older, I've realized that success in business, and many of the top investors will tell you this, or the people that have been at it for a while, is it's not about who's the smartest. It's not about necessarily who works the hardest. It's not about who does the deepest analysis. The biggest kind of change in my life, and this is the second time I'm now professionally managing money, is aligning my investment and my investment strategy and the way I run the portfolio to my personality
Hmm.
and recognizing that I can get way too excited and that I am a passionate person when I'm excited. And so that can be a real weakness. That can be a real blind spot for
Hmm.
me and has been in the past. So, how can I tone down the highs and lows? And
Yeah.
one way I do it is by specifically trying to invest in companies where I'm taking a very long view
Yeah.
and developing an investment strategy that is not so trading oriented and avoiding the situations that would maybe cause my stress or emotions to impact my decision making and still be passionate about things, but be passionate about things over the long run, not what's going to happen in any quarter or things like that. And oh my goodness, my stress level this time around is so much lower. I feel like I am thinking clearer than I ever
Huh.
have been. I think that matching some your own personality, who you are, to the right investment style might or something that works well that matches your strengths and minimizes your weaknesses might be more important than anything else that you do in investing.
Yeah. I think that that's right. I have personally struggled with, like I'm not the guy who is going to be able to outmodel a tiger cub, right? Like those guys are going to beat me at that game. And what is tough at times to manage, a portfolio through is, on Twitter, we all interact with each other, right? So, like, I see how they think about the world, and I'm just a retail guy, right? So that helps, I guess. But the other side of it is, like, I'll say, I think a stock that I own is not what I'd buy, right? And then the question that comes back is, well, why do you hold it? It's like, I don't know. I mean, honestly, part of it is I bought it at a good price. I'm trying to accumulate wealth over time. I've never seen any time in history where wealth doesn't accumulate to good, like people that own good businesses bought at good prices. And if I underperform for a little while, I have demonstrated the ability to make some good buys, and I'll probably find a better use of the capital down the road. I just don't have one net today. And like, I'm not getting off the train of something that's maybe a little bit rich to go trade into something else. And part of that's probably because I don't have like this super precise, like, all of these calculations that I'm really, really confident in and that I know that I can trade out of one and into the other. I more wait for what I think is obvious and then I try to swing. And I've been thinking about this a lot lately. But when I was young, I was a pretty good golfer. And by pretty good, I mean like I was a 2 or a 3 handicap. Probably a 3. I don't want to like overstate it. There's a big difference once you get down to those numbers. But I was my best when I played more in the realm of feel. Now, like, you can't just get out there and feel your way into golf. You've got to work at the stuff that matters to get good at it. But where I started to kind of mess myself up is when I started to listen to everybody that told me I had to be really, really precise, right? And then I became mechanical, and I never really allowed myself, I think, to develop into what I could have been. And also, I don't think my mind was mature enough to be the very, very good golfers. But what I'm trying to do is implement that knowledge of myself and say, okay, well, just because you're interacting with people that demand precision, that doesn't mean that it's you, and that can work for them. And now part of why I say I'm not qualified to run a fund is I don't know if I'm comfortable telling other people that they should run my strategy or that I'm competent to run their money for them. But it's just kind of a thing that I've been really ruminating on over the past couple months, especially as some of these stocks have been, golf balls off of a street, right? Now the prices that I purchased them at are like not even reflective of the current reality. So I
Well,
like how you said that.
I like what you I think of it as false precision. As I've gotten older, I used to be so focused on the short term, not so focused on the short term, but so worried about the short term. And when you're more worried about the short term instead of these longer term trends, then in any quarter, investors really love certainty and they really love like kind of the straight line. But life isn't like that. Business isn't like that. You can have weird things pop up, and just kind of continuing on, just what's helped me is thinking more directionally about where things are going and not really worried about the short term so much unless there's something that indicates like management incompetence or a fundamental change to the thesis. And so what's helped me is I rely a lot less on trying to be precise in the short term because I find that personally my skill set is not determining how great a certain quarter is, or but I can kind of, if I can see, if I feel like I have an edge about where things are going, then I don't mind being early. I don't mind being wrong in the short term, but I can arbitrage. So many people are so focused on the short term and not they're afraid to look dumb or not make money in the short term that I can actually arbitrage that concern and outperform in the long term. And so I think there's a huge advantage today in just having a longer time horizon than
Yeah.
everybody else. And you can kind of see it. Very, very smart people on Twitter who feel like they need to be in what's ever working now or
Yeah.
not be seen as wrong. And I think there's also this thing that I've realized is like when I first started managing money, felt it was important to do both longs and shorts and really have that hedge fund model and like really manage. I used to send a monthly report to investors, which I think is absolutely terrible now. I don't even know why I did that. But this whole idea of like minimizing volatility, if that's your strategy to run like, to try to minimize volatility or try to prove that you're investing and that you're not going to be as volatile and that you'll make more, I think there's an opportunity to just say, well, no, I actually don't think volatility is risk. I'm going to take a longer time horizon. I'm going to marry the capital that understands that and embrace volatility, or just accept that it may happen. And I think you can outperform because you're just not
Yeah.
playing the same game that everybody else is playing. I think there's
I
real value in that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I don't know. I need to be measured in how this comes out of my mouth because I'm not sure what I actually think. I agree with you intuitively, and I have been fortunate enough to outperform a lot of the reason as I put up a big year last year by my standards. A lot of people had bigger years, but I do wonder as I've been able to have, conversations with other investors that I just have like mad respect for. I mean, like you're one of them. I have
Oh, thank you.
like I am shocked at the guest lists that I have been able to have. And to be fair to myself, I'm really proud of deserving the guest list that I have. But if you had asked me when this whole thing started, what would I build? This has, I wouldn't say exceeded my wildest dreams because I love Howard Stern and being the Stern of finance is probably my wildest dream, but
See, this
it
is why
certainly
you should have
exceeded.
taken off your shirt. This
Well,
you would have been
yes,
right.
I'm gonna show up to Sohn one day with my ass hanging out as Fart Man, and then it'll then I'll really be him. No, but I think that it certainly has exceeded my base case, right? So I guess that what I have realized is what I'm up against. And there was a certain amount of naivety when I started all this that I think I was like, oh, yeah, models are kind of BS, and the short term is what everybody's focused on, and the long term is what you need to look at. I still think there is a grain of truth in all of those statements, but I also respect the people that are doing like the short term work. I just think it's a game that
Oh no, for sure. It's
we,
just
I'm not
super
saying that you
hard.
don't.
You have to
Yeah,
just
yeah, yeah.
figure out the game that you're playing and who the participants are. Back in my career, so I mentioned before that I started managing money, and then part of my career is that I started buying foreclosed homes, fixing them up, and renting them out in 2009. I have a very contrarian bent, and I was just, a friend approached me and we bought a house for like a 4 bedroom, 2 bath house in Charlotte, North Carolina for 75,000. We put 10,000 into it, rented it for 1,000 a month. And I did the
Oh,
math
that's
in my
pretty
head and I
nice.
was like, I may not be, a PhD in calculus, but these are pretty good economics.
Yeah,
And as a side portfolio, I started building that up, and people looked at me like I was crazy, and like, why would you? I started literally with just buying $1 million worth of home. People were like, why would you start such a small? And I was like, I don't know, it may turn into something. But
yeah,
the reason I mentioned this story is fast forward to 2011, and now I had like 250 homes, and I had 250 home portfolio, and then I had this small hedge fund that I literally had built from scratch, where I started above my parents' garage, and my dad wasn't even sure what I was doing. And he used to cut out job listings and put them in front of my computer in the morning. They were happy that I was home, but they
yeah.
literally used to put it in, and I'd be like, I actually have a job. I'm managing, this friend's money who sold his business, and I'm going to try. And finally, he realized how hard I was working, and that was fine. And so eventually, I moved away after 2 years, but it was a great start. Anyway, so
Why did your friend trust you, you think?
oh, that's it. Let me get to that. Let me get to my original reason why I was mentioning it. And so, end of 2011, I'm looking at my competitive set. So I'm running a small cap value fund, the end of 2011. It's done very well, outperformed the market by like 800 basis points from 98 to 2011. And I'm looking at buying homes in Atlanta, Georgia, and Charlotte, North Carolina, where I'm showing up at the courthouse steps and there's no one there. There's literally just me, and they're like, highest and best. Here's a home for $50,000. It's a safe suburban 3 bedroom, 2 bath home. And I was looking at my competitive set, and this is before Colony and Blackstone and everybody. And I suddenly dawned on me, and I said, wait a minute, I'm competing against like Dan Loeb, Tiger Cubs, artificial intelligence, computer scraping and all this stuff. I'm like banging my head against the wall, done well, but like super competitive. Financial markets, the best and the brightest. Everybody's going there. And I'm competing against no one here.
Yeah,
And so I said to myself, and I wound down my hedge fund and I just said, hey, I'm going to go here. And then went on a wild journey where I grew that from 250 homes to 2,500, and it was a whole nutty experience. But I'm very drawn to where the competition is less, or
yeah,
where other people aren't looking. And that's been part of my success or seeing opportunities. And so, to why I mention it is I think it's really important when you're thinking about investing is when you're asking what your edge is, the other side of it or parallel to it is who are you who are your fellow investors, or who are looking at certain investments, and why are they not there, or why
yeah,
are they not investing, and then in the future why are they going to care? That's also a very important point. And so that's what draws me into cannabis right now. That's what draws me to Mexico and all of these other things, is really asking the question, who's sitting around the table, or
yeah,
who's going to want to join. Now, to your other question as to why that person, you have to go way back to actually when I was 9 or 10. I don't remember, but my dad had opened. I'm going to date myself here, but my dad had opened the Wall Street Journal, and there's a whole list of stock tables, and I asked him what it was, and he explained it to me, and it was like, wow, this is really fascinating. And my dad, was an entrepreneur. He was set up his own insurance brokerage, and he would invest as a on the side. But I was immediately hooked. And my dad loves telling the story that he went into a brokerage office at some point for something and brought me in, and some guy like taps him on the shoulder and says, "Hey, is that your son?" And my dad immediately thinks like, what has he done? What's wrong?
Yeah.
And my dad's like, yeah, that's my son. And he was like, does he know what he's reading? Because I was just like,
Yeah, yeah,
distracted,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
looking through
yeah.
the newspaper. And
That's
so
funny. I like
fast
that.
forward, in high school, all I talk about is stocks. In college, all I would talk about was like why Philip Morris was undervalued versus his cash flows.
Mm.
Definitely didn't help with the ladies. I
Yeah,
can
but that
tell
was a
you
good time
that.
to be buying Philip Morris.
Yeah, but everyone would be like, wait, this guy, all he's interested in is stocks. And so I actually met this friend of mine, and we would just talk. Anyway, he went to go start a company with his father. And like 2 years later, I'm researching stocks for a now defunct financial publication. But he calls me up one day and is like, "Hey, I sold my company." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that's amazing," And I was like, "So what are you, like, a millionaire now?" And he's like, "Well, yeah." And
There you
I
go.
was like, "Oh wow." And it was like I was literally the only person he knew who knew about anything about stocks.
Huh.
And so we just started talking, and he said, "Well, hey, can you help me out and just manage?" And so I started with literally like $1 million, and I had no money of my own. And I said, "How can I make this work?" And I was dumb enough to not know what I didn't know,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so I moved above my parents' garage. I had meals, I had no rent. All I had to do, and my parents lived in New Hampshire at this point. So like I'm in the middle of nowhere. There's no distractions, right? And so I did that for 2 years, and then grew it and did very well, and was just completely in a different place than every other person, and then grew that. And that's why I got lucky, because all I talked about was stock. My interest was so focused that when someone was looking for help, they thought of me because they knew it's all I thought about.
Yeah. That's a cool story. I like that. So my time now is like not spent running my public portfolio at all. That's probably another reason that I'm fine. I guess I guess what I would say to people, like if they hear me say something that a stock that I own is at a price that I wouldn't buy it at, and like the natural question back is like, well, then why don't you sell it? The answer to that question is I like this podcast right now is my next best idea, right? Like that is what I'm working on. And if my public portfolio underperforms as a result of this podcast having attention, I view this podcast as career diversification risk, right? Like career risk diversification and sort of like my VC basket of my overall portfolio. So I'm sort of like okay accepting the fact that my public portfolio may have a little bit of neglect in it. And I still think about stocks like constantly, but it's mine. So like who cares if it underperforms for a little bit? If they're businesses that are good businesses that I can continue to own for the long haul and I can deal with a 30% drawdown, like markdown, and it doesn't actually change like my life materially relative to what I'm focused on. If the upside works, that would change my life. Like that's kind of how I think about this stuff.
Yeah, but
And I
then
like
just
that you're
depending
saying
on the
that.
the price and valuation of the business, there may be times where you are a buyer and where you're not a buyer. And
Yes,
a great
100%.
example is, let's say that definitively a stock was worth $100, and that you knew it was worth $100. You had an edge. You were able to buy it at 50, and you knew this company not only was worth $100, but was going to compound at 15% a year, so that that value was going to grow. Well, what happens if all of a sudden you buy it at 50, and then like a couple of months later it's at 90 or
Yeah,
92?
well, this is part of the problem that I'm
Yeah,
suffering from.
do you sell it? Well, no. I mean, if it's still going to compound at 15%, like it's still a really nice investment. Is it as exceptional as when you first bought it? No. And
Yeah.
so I think the more important question is has my thesis changed? Or if you
Yes.
watch a stock go from 50 to 200, well, then that might be a very different conversation. And
Yeah.
when stocks start doing things that don't make any fundamental sense or way overshoot your most wild expectations, well then I go back to bulls and bears make money, pigs get slaughtered. But I think it also is important to not fall back on false precision and really make sure that you're not selling too early. This is the classic value investors dilemma, is watching a stock go up a couple 100% when no one likes it, and then you sell and then it goes up like another 500%. So I
Yeah.
think that
Yeah.
there's a balancing act that needs to
Yeah.
go on.
No, I agree with you. The name that I'm thinking of a couple names in my head, but like one that I'm long that I'm thinking about is Disney, right? And like I think a lot of people would argue that Disney is at least not trading at a huge discount to where it should, right? Maybe agreeing that it's somewhere in the range of fair is a good way to avoid an argument that doesn't need to be had. I bought it when it was really cheap. And like when I look at what they're doing with Disney Plus and what they're able to do with the Star Wars franchise and what Marvel's able to do and how they're pivoting it into a TV franchise and what that asset gives them and how they can spin off characters and how that allows them to invest in the parks and like how the whole business model works together, I'm not going to sell that if it's a little rich. Like I just don't. It's not. What am I going to do? I'm going to go eke out a little bit of return in an asset that I don't know as well. Like that doesn't make any sense to me. And I guess that like maybe where some of my insecurity about running outside capital comes from is like I don't know if that's a sufficient answer to be like a pro's pro, but I know it's the answer that I need to have to get me to the finish line. And that's the most important question for me. So it may not be good enough to run a hedge fund, and that's fine, right? But I'm just me.
And I
So
think
that's
that that's really important, that you know what kind of investor you are. And I think it's also important to think about whose capital are you investing
yeah,
and what are their expectations. I think so many people were like, I have got this great investment strategy, and then I'm going to raise money, and then I'm going to make, and it's going to be so easy. But I can tell you from my experience that everybody's a value investor, everybody's a long-term investor until they start losing money.
yeah,
And then you find out who your investors really are.
huh,
And the people that call you all the time, the people that contact you all the time. And my second time around, I'm not marketing. I, I
yeah,
I don't want I don't want to grow for growth's sake. I did that with the single family home company, the American Home, and I took on I raised crazy amounts of money, and I don't want to grow for growth's sake. And to your point about the podcast, I started a Substack newsletter in July. I've really been more intentional on Twitter and I decided to lean in. I'm finding that I actually love writing and communicating
yeah,
and
yeah,
sharing. And
yeah,
I actually may love it more than actual investing. But what's
yeah,
great about marrying writing with investing is I can say, hey, I have these ideas, I have a philosophy, and I have a strategy. And why would I report returns to investors if I don't want their money? Is because I want to show the scorecard for how
yes,
it
dude. That's
works
why I
in the
posted
real
my
world.
returns.
That's exactly right.
100%, man.
It's like
That's why.
this is how my philosophy and strategy works in the real term, and this is why you should listen to me, or at least not listen to me, listen and hear what I'm saying, not just blindly follow me, but just engage with me in some way.
Dude, I I couldn't say it better myself. I mean, that's why I said like when I posted my returns, I never expected to be a guy that sort of was in people's ears and had 20,000 followers on Twitter. And like, I, I fucking hate the people that do not take the responsibility of having followers. Like, I almost view it as a fiduciary relationship. I mean, that's too far. That's not quite how far I go with it. But like, man, do I care about the people that follow me. And when I see people that are using those people in a like, if I perceive there to be some usage in a relationship, it just like sets me off.
I
So
completely agree. Do you follow Alex Danko?
I don't think I do.
Oh, he has this. So the real
I might.
thing
He's
that
not my feed. Let's put it that way.
okay,
He's not somebody that I regularly see.
okay, so I started following him. He writes newsletter and occasionally interview. And if you know, I've seen him a couple times interact with Mario at the Generalist. I don't know either of them personally, but he wrote a post that really spoke to me about gift culture. And it spoke to me so much, I wrote a post about it. And that is that if you think about the internet and you think about like Twitter, we are in an age of abundance, too much overflowing information. And so, how do you thrive in an age of abundance based on history? And it turns out that the most successful communities or societies are ones that engage in something called a gift culture. And that is that the more you give, the better
Yeah,
off
the
the
more you
community
receive.
is and the more you receive.
Yeah.
And it really, really struck me. Part of what I would say is that the people that are using are doing a short term, not only is it unethical, but they're not going to be enriched in the long term like you and I are. Now, maybe their goals are very different as just to rack up dollar bills. And we know
Yeah,
plenty of
I think they'll
people
beat
in
me in the
SPAC
money game.
land and playing people. And I share your same feelings towards them. But that it's not necessarily a fiduciary because you're not managing your money. I like that you said that.
Yeah.
But to me, it's like if I'm playing the long game and I want to treat them how I'd want to be treated, I'd want to say things to them and learn and share those learnings. So hopefully they share with me. One of the coolest
Yeah.
things since writing the newsletter and doing all these things is people giving feedback, even criticism. I wrote something where I thought the share count of this one cannabis stock was one thing, and I had read it wrong. It was written in a confusing way, but I had written it wrong, and the person was like, "No, actually, this is the right number. You're wrong." And that's actually really, really valuable, or that you need to pay attention that this dynamic of a pipe and this and that, and I had just missed it. But it also makes me more careful because I don't want to be embarrassed. I don't
Yeah.
want to be like I have false information and I'm getting ideas and people are sharing back and forth. And so I now have this idea flow
Yeah.
that I wouldn't have had before. The way I view it is that I'm receiving so much more. And not only am I like exposing people to kind of contrarian ideas or ideas that are outside of what they normally see, but then I put a post last year after Buffett invested in Japan, and I was like, this is really fascinating. I'm interested in Japan. I'm an investor in Nintendo, and and I see the valuation difference between Japanese companies and US companies. And then all these people just started saying, "Oh, you should look at this stock." You should, and it was like, it was overwhelming. But then all of a
Yeah.
sudden, I had like a list of ideas that I had never seen before.
Yeah. No, I think it's cool. We were talking a little bit before this started. The one thing that I feel like I have to manage is when, look, I don't know how to frame what I'm about to say and not sound like a little bit arrogant with it, but it's what I think, so I'm just going to say it out loud and hopefully people forgive me. I feel like this podcast could be on the precipice of becoming something big. And if that is a true assumption, I worry that I'm going to have to be, I already am much more guarded about who I invite on and how I get guests, right? And like, one of the things that's tough is I don't want to be like Rogan where you'll have anybody on who can say anything they want. On the other hand, like I really value highlighting people that other podcasts aren't highlighting, right? I really like finding the people that are out here doing similar stuff that maybe don't have the name, so they're not getting, they're just not doing the circuit. I like that stuff. And a lot of like, I mean, I think you and I are peers. Just talking to you, we did that space together and I was like, man, he's a cool dude. And like we do
Oh,
this
thank you.
and before, like I think we see the world very similarly. It's like, why the hell wouldn't I want to have you on my podcast,
Oh,
right?
thank you
But
so much. You know what I love about your podcast is one of my operating assumptions for investing in the world and how you should operate your life is if you look for situations where there is low downside but
yeah,
uncertain upside. This is
yeah,
literally what I'm trying to do in my fund right now. Low downside, uncertain upside. And where my biggest opportunities is where I take that. And you think about when I first started managing money. Let's say I started managing money, I'm above my parents' garage. What's the worst that could have happened to me? I would have had to go
yeah. I
find
mean,
a job.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
was fine. I wasn't like burning money. I didn't have like this crazy team. I literally had one client and I was above my parents' garage. I had free rent and free food. There was no
yeah,
distractions. And so, when I started buying foreclosed homes, I had a job managing money in the stock market. I had savings, started a small partnership, raised some money from people, and just saying people would ask me, like, in March of 2009, wow, you can't get a more dire scenario
yeah,
than March of
yeah,
2009. I'm raising, and they would be like, why are you raising $1 million? That's like 16 or 17 homes. It's like, it doesn't make any sense. Why are you doing this? And I was like, I don't know. It may turn into something.
hmm,
And it's the same thing of like when I started writing the newsletter. I started writing the newsletter in July of last year. And 50 people started following me. Now I have,
yeah,
almost 2,200. I have no idea where the newsletter is going to go, or all I just know is I'm loving it. Doesn't
yeah,
cost me anything outside of time. And so what I love about what you're doing with the podcast, and I think you're exactly right, is let's just say it doesn't hit the big time.
yeah,
What's the worst that would have happened to you? You would
yeah.
have
No, my
had
opportunity
awesome
cost is nil.
conversations with
Yeah,
all of
yeah.
these
That's
people
exactly
you
right.
never would have met, and you're
Yeah,
now richer for it,
yeah. That's right.
and you have all these different mental models and different investing styles that you can choose from.
Yeah. Well, what's weird, man? When I started, it's funny. This is the way the podcast goes. I thought we were going to jump on and talk about weed, and now we're talking about all different types of stuff, which I actually think is like much more useful.
We
And
can get there. We can get
we
there.
will, we will. But like when I left, I was underwriting loans. It was first lien debt at commercial bank, right? So I leave there to try to figure out how I'm going to manage my money because I really didn't trust indexes. And I'm starting to trust them a little bit more, but I look at some of these valuations out there and I'm like, I don't think that I want my money to be market cap weighted in some of these bets. So, whether or not that is a correct assumption, if I don't trust it and it goes wrong, I'm going to bail, right? This is like the typical you can't borrow somebody else's conviction thing. If an index doesn't work and I lost my money in an index thinking what I think, I'd never be able to look myself in the mirror. And like, I will not make that problem. That's the one thing that I will never lose to again is fading myself.
And
And
then
I
you'll
guess like I
sell at the
start,
wrong time. You'll make the wrong because you don't have the conviction. Whenever
yeah, well,
I
and I'm
I
tired of
still
not
make
betting
this
on me.
mistake sometimes, is the stock will go down. I'm like, oh no, whenever there's some kind of emotional charge when a stock makes a movement against me, I know what my conviction level is. You
Yeah,
immediately know what your conviction level is if you're suddenly concerned about the day to day movement of a stock
yeah,
or a
that's true.
commodity. Like I found last year that I was like tracking oil and natural gas prices. And I actually wrote like this whole change in my philosophy around energy is just from challenging myself. Why, if I have this great long-term thesis that oil and natural gas are super cheap and they're going to go great, why am I tracking day to day? And then, the more I dug, the more I have to really understand the renewable side because I read
Yeah.
enough to be dangerous. But then the more I dove down, I realized, oh, I really don't have conviction here. It could go, the probability set is not what I thought it was. And I really shouldn't be invested in this because renewable energy is growing exponentially. And that's kind of unconsciously what's bothering me. And that I'm not as comfortable with the downside as I was before.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. It's hard to know when you know. Chris Meyer, the guy that wrote 100 Baggers, wrote a book, How Do You Know You Know? It's on my shelf. I haven't read it. I should read it, but I bet it's pretty good because he I mean I've read what he's written and I follow him on Twitter and I met him through Manual of Ideas and I like that guy's mind. So I suspect if he put it in a book it's worth somebody's time if they're interested in delving into this topic, but I can't recommend it because I haven't read it myself. So I guess I did. Oh well, I digress. So you want to talk about weed? Cannabis,
Sure.
US
Sure.
cannabis, multi-state operators?
Yeah, yeah. So let me dive in. I actually think it's really valuable. So you remember that we already had this discussion to this point because you'll understand why I'm interested in cannabis.
Okay.
So I've already told you I like to fish where I think there is lots of fish and where there aren't other fishermen. Okay.
Yeah.
Or
Yep.
they haven't realized there's this great fishing spot. That might be the
Yeah.
better analogy.
Yeah. That's
And
fair.
then I like that. And I like situations where I feel like the downside is low, but the upside is uncertain. Like I don't know exactly the timing or when it's going to play out. And if I'm wrong, I feel like my downside's pretty low. So what fascinates me about cannabis is just a conversation I recently had and I wrote about. I get in touch through Twitter. By the way, very bullish on Twitter because of this, and because of how we meet and you meet
Dude,
everyone
it's
now.
funny. Like everybody on FinTwit is. I worry that we're just one big Twitter echo chamber, but
Maybe,
man,
but
has
it
that thing
derives.
changed
I
my
derive
life.
so much value from it. Like they could literally say, Aaron, it now costs you $20 a month, and I'd be like, oh, what took you so long? you know,
Man,
you
I
know.
would
So,
too. And the other thing is not to divert the conversation to Twitter, but I talked to a class yesterday and they were asking me how I think through Twitter. And I was like, look, I think if you take these assumptions and you look at like, this sort of ARPU idea, I think that you can get yourself to somewhere that it can work. And then I said, it also helps that I feel like I'm a little bit in the center of what they're trying to iterate on. And like I've been able to interact with some of the people there because of it. And then I said, and finally, like, let's say I'm wrong. It's like 4% of my portfolio. What's my real risk here? 50%, maybe. I mean, it's a strategic asset to somebody. So like
yeah.
I might lose 2% and I've got an asset that like I really love owning. Like who gives a shit if I lose on that bet? Like I love owning this asset. I've never seen another asset like this in my entire life. And I don't think it's going to lose its relevance in the world. So I'm
Well,
long. Like
what
I don't
I
know what to
see,
tell you.
what I see is like I've never loved something more that's so literally under monetizes every
Yeah.
part of my relationship. It's like this
Yeah.
free utility. And I'm always
Yeah.
like, how is this possible? So anyway, so going back to weed.
And they
So
just
this
rebuilt their ad stack, by
yeah,
the
yeah,
way.
yeah,
So
no,
like
it's all of that. All of that. We can
maybe it used to be crappy, but like
yeah,
let's
yeah,
see
yeah.
what happens over the next 3 to 5 years, and then
I
we
have
can
a whole
talk about whether or
thesis
not
on
this
that.
is
Yeah,
a
yeah.
dumb idea.
No, for sure. But um so this money manager gets in touch with me. He's like, "Hey, I saw you writing about cannabis." And he comes and says, I have a conversation, manages over, he's one of the managers, who manages for a firm over $80 billion. He wants to talk
Whew,
cannabis. Okay. 80
that's big
billion.
money.
Like,
Yeah, that's
yeah,
big money.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And I'm like, he and a couple other of the money managers who professionally manage different parts of the $80 billion are not allowed to invest in cannabis. Okay?
Yeah.
So is he calling to find out, pick my brain, to learn more? No. He knows about as much as I do or more, has built sophisticated models, much smarter guy than me, but his compliance department won't let him invest
Yeah.
because of the
Yeah.
federal illegality. So what attracts
Dude,
me
so
to it is just
first of all,
imagine.
just so people know, I'm along this idea too for the exact same reason. I
So
don't know how to handicap the end state of the cannabis industry, and we will discuss that. But at the
yeah,
core, this is a funds flow bet for me. Like, this is
yeah,
almost a structural special situation that if I don't bet it, I'll never forgive myself when it rips.
yeah. No, so I just want you to think about going back to what I was talking about before. Is just think about the people you've interviewed on your
Yeah.
podcast. You're competing with them. It's this weird thing where we're trying to learn, we're trying to be cooperative, gift culture, all that great stuff, kumbaya, we'll all get together, but we're
Yeah.
really trying to make more money than the other person, right? Or just do it better in some risk
Yeah.
adjusted format, right? And so just imagine the sheer brain power that not only is like human, but now computer that goes into trying to make more money than the other guy.
Oh, I know. It's
Now,
crazy.
now think about you have this $100 billion market. Now,
I like how
mo-
passionate you get. I do like
mo-
that. That's
yeah, thank you.
You're
Most of it's
welcome.
most of it's illegal. Okay, so you have $100 billion existing market. And I don't know what the market's like. The legal market's maybe like 15 or 20 billion now, or somewhere in that range. And imagine that 99%, it may actually be more, 99% of your competition
Is
is not
structurally
allowed
precluded.
to invest.
Yeah.
And then what's amazing is the more research you do, you find that this is actually being normalized, it's being legalized, that the growth rates are off the charts, the usage, the benefits to society, we can go into all of those things, and that
I did
this
a lot
will.
of due diligence in college too,
Yeah,
so I
yeah,
have a
that's right.
good sense.
This is going to be like $100 billion business or more that runs through companies, and no one's invested in it, or almost no one's invested in it for a variety. So
S-
first you have the compliance reason, and then the other thing that I'm fascinated by is how many, and I wrote about this, is how many of my peers who are frankly who I talk to on a regular basis, they're smarter than me, okay? Who in general can do better analysis or have greater resources than I do. Why are they not invested in it? And I realize that and I think it relates, the second reason why investors are not, beyond the compliance, is that I was trying to understand, if you're a state and you allow legal medical marijuana, it is super easy to get a medical card and get yourself cannabis. I have
yeah,
anxiety, I can't sleep,
dude,
whatever. You get
I'll
the
tell you what
doctor,
I got.
they give you the medical card. It's like nothing, right? It's like the easiest thing in the world. And I was trying to understand, when a state then goes from medical to adult use, which just means anybody can do, you don't need the medical card, which literally might take you, 5 or 10 minutes of your
I'm
time,
starting to
maybe
get back
15.
pain. I might have to go to a doctor here
Yeah,
soon.
yeah, that's exactly right. So why do sales go up 2 or 3 times when a market
Well,
transitions
yeah,
from
you get
medical to adult? There's a
destigmatized.
stigma. I believe most people want to follow the law.
Yeah, I
I mean,
think that's
I
rational.
do in general. And so I think that there's a second psychological thing, that investing in cannabis just kind of feels wrong, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, how would it look? Even before I started writing about it last year, I asked myself, and I said, am I ready to write about this? Am
Yeah.
I going to be known as like the weed guy or the cannabis investor?
Yeah, man.
And and then I just realized, no, that's silly. And even now, and I've had one or two people DM me or reach out to me and basically say, "Hey, I actually am dipping my toe in the water, but I'm not doing it publicly."
Yeah, why would I
Or
talk about it? Dude,
there's no ups yeah,
I'm
there's
a
no upside to people that have bigger reputations or bigger investment pools.
yeah, well, so I really enjoy marijuana. And and the reason that I do a lot of the times is like I mean I've talked about some I'm concerned about alcohol and how it will interact with my body, and I don't really want to have that as my primary vice. Pot has never given me a feeling of addiction ever. Pot has never made me want to do really stupid stuff. Pot has occasionally made me want to sit around and smoke more pot. I mean, I will admit that like that's the downside, but like I haven't hurt anybody doing it. I haven't I mean, I think I'm a reasonably productive member of society. It helps me relax. And like I mean, I smoked heavily in college. I don't smoke heavily now, and I didn't for a long time. But what am I? I've been smoking for 20 years, and I still, like, just 2 months ago, got myself to be able to be like, okay, I'm just going to publicly admit this because of all
It's
the
funny,
stigma
isn't
around
it
it, right?
crazy? There's the
Yeah.
stigma, and it's actually one of the Super Bowl cases is how much that stigma is holding back. If you just think about having a party or a wedding or something, alcohol freely flows. But let me tell you
Yeah,
why
that's right.
I'm specifically bullish on cannabis.
All
Is
right, I'm just going to let you go, man.
you have the element. No, 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 I don't mean it. You have
No,
the
I love how
element
passionate you are about
of
it.
getting
It's
high,
fantastic to listen
but
to. I
but
do want people to know though, like when they're listening to this, you are listening to two people that are bulled up on an idea. And I only
yes.
say that because I don't care about the pros that listen. I do care a lot about the retail investor. So just, understand you listen to two people that are pretty hyped up right now, and this is a
Absolutely.
decent sales pitch. So
You got to do your
don't
own due
listen to this and go out and
diligence
buy your
and
own
then
stuff. Yeah.
understand that's a great. I'm wrong a lot. And I actually want to admit when I'm wrong and I want to learn and I'm continuing to learn and I make mistakes. So, absolutely. I could be wrong about
And if
this.
what you hear is wrong, please reach out to both of us and tell us why we're wrong. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
that's half the
Yeah.
benefit of the podcast,
Yeah.
too. So, all right, continue.
For
Sorry,
sure.
I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, 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 for sure. It's very valuable. The reason that I got really interested in cannabis was not necessarily about getting high, but it was around the health and wellness aspect of it. When I realized just how big the market was going to be. So let me throw out some data points that just completely fascinating that you may or may not have seen. One is when cannabis is legalized, whether medical or adult use, opioid use goes down significantly. Pharmaceutical prescription numbers go down.
Have you seen the alcohol consumption numbers?
Yeah,
They plummet.
yeah, beer and wine, that as well. Here's what's even more fascinating. Workers' comp claims go down.
Huh.
And so you start asking yourself, wait a minute, why would workers' comp claims go down upon legalization of marijuana and marijuana usage go up? And then you start realizing how many people are self medicating with opioids, with
Yeah.
alcohol, and with super strong pharmaceuticals that are actually affecting their job performance. How many people are in pain, are suffering from insomnia, anxiety, depression, and you realize that marijuana is actually this benefit that one of the big fears of marijuana is when it was legalized you'd have teen usage go up, teen usage falls,
Hmm.
and you just there's all of these benefits. And one of the things I've suffered on and off through my life is insomnia. I hope that you've never had this,
I
Bill, but
kind of suffer from it now. I mean, not
it
insomnia,
is
but sometimes it's
it
hard for me
is
to get more than 4 hours.
yeah. And so I had last September, I had a really bad bout of it where I would either wake up at 1 a.m. after being asleep for like 2 or 3 hours and I couldn't go back to sleep, or I
Yeah.
couldn't go to sleep till like
Yeah.
5:30 or 6
Oh,
in the
dude,
morning.
100%.
And what I found is went down to the local dispensary, got a chamomile tea with a low dosage of THC and CBD, got some gummies, some chocolates, low dose, went ahead and then for a week took that right before I went to bed, reset my sleep system. Now able sleeping great, and I don't wake up groggy. I don't wake
Hmm.
up with a hangover. I don't, and
What was it
I
like?
feel
Uh,
fresh
was
and
it like a 2 to 1 CBD THC?
yeah, it's like something like that, but like
Yeah.
5 milligrams, like some really low
Yeah.
dose.
Yeah. No,
And
it's
I
like a
just realized,
microdose. Yeah.
yeah, like have you ever taken like an Ambien or one of those over? You're on a plane flight or wherever you wake up and you're like, or
Yeah.
there's other people who've like, hey, I have some extra muscle relaxants and I'm gonna take them and I guarantee it's gonna knock me out. And it's like, whoa, you actually don't really want to do that, right? You
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
and so you just realize like the health and wellness aspects of this are just so powerful and strong. And you realize how big the market's going to be. And that's what got me really bullish on cannabis is that I realized how many people could benefit. And then they found that kids who have seizures can benefit, soldiers with PTSD will benefit, people trying to get off of powerful opioids can transition to marijuana, that they're finding now initial research is showing that the toxicity of cancer treatments, that they're tolerating these super powerful cancer drugs better
Hmm.
when combined with THC or cannabis usage because there's some anti-inflammatory properties to it.
Hmm.
And so we're just scratching the surface of something that's been used for thousands of years and has been demonized first for industrial reasons, then for racial reasons. That really isn't backed up by science or data. They find that people work out more who use cannabis. They find out that
Work out more than who? They're not working out more than like sober people. I don't buy that. Maybe than
telling you, I
alcohol.
just read a study that like
Yeah.
that extreme runners, there's a problem. This is totally crazy, but that extreme runners are, with those extreme distances. I don't get it
Yeah.
at
Yeah.
all, but they run 50, 100 miles or whatever. That there's a controversy in the sport that some of them are using cannabis and that it may be a
Like
benefit
for healing. Yeah. I
for
could buy that
healing.
actually.
That,
Yeah, I
that
could
it
buy
may
that.
be a benefit. And so, is it banned? Is it not? Are they cheating? Are they not? And then you realize you blow up these stereotypes of the stoner sitting on the couch, not doing
Yes.
anything. And then you think
Yes.
about all the athletes, NFL and NBA, who've got in trouble because of cannabis and instead are then hooked on opioids, and you think about the damage to their body. So to me, the health and wellness is pretty clear in the data. It doesn't mean that it shouldn't be necessarily regulated. You shouldn't protect children and children's young minds and all of that. But
Yeah.
so that's what gets me so fascinated is you have this very large market that's now becoming legal and normalized on a level when you have like Ellen DeGeneres talking about drinking a marijuana, I think it was like a juice or some kind of drink on her program. And that you have more and more people coming forward and saying this, insurance companies now considering it. You have the Alabama State Senate approving medical marijuana. The thing that I was thinking about the other day is, you think about marijuana and the legalization effort as a very progressive cause, but I can't tell you how many country songs going back to Hank Williams and Charlie Daniels there is about smoking marijuana and getting
Yeah.
high. So the idea that this
Well,
is either a left or a right or whatever, this is used by almost everyone. So, and then you get to the whole, you go to the political realities of the tax revenue, the jobs, and you just kind of see what's happening. And this past election, and even this year, you have New Mexico and New York, and Arizona and New Jersey, and just state after state just legalizing it, while you have this kind of weird federal illegality.
yeah.
And so this is the backdrop of
So
what gets me so interested. And the last thing I'll mention is the weirdest thing is that you have US cannabis companies that you have to buy in Canada. They
yeah,
don't even
well,
trade on the Toronto Stock Exchange. They trade on the Canadian Securities Exchange and something called the NEO.
yeah. So let's get into a little bit about the licensing and how different states sort of have their licenses, if you're cool with that. Because
Yeah, for sure.
one of my questions is, you have these like limited license availability. So like I was talking to Jake Taylor about, he said, I'd like to, there's a price to book ratio that I'd be okay buying these companies at. And I was like, dude, the thing is, what that license is booked at on the books is immediately worth way, way more. Like you can't look at it on a price to book. Where I will give his thought some credit, though, is what keeps me up at night long term in this thesis is, how does the Commerce Clause impact interstate commerce, and
Oh, now
whether or
you're
not
getting right to the
you're
heart of
going
it.
to unleash a scenario where actually similarly situated companies start to all compete with each other in a federally legalized system. Like that is almost my worst case scenario for the industry.
No, no, well, one, so
My
you,
feared worst case
yeah, yeah, yeah.
scenario, if
So,
that makes
so
sense.
let's hit the backdrop for
Okay.
people who may
Yeah.
not know.
Yeah.
The rules, because there's no state federal legality, different states have radically different rules. For example, in Massachusetts, one entity or any of the related parties in that entity can only own 3 retail dispensaries. In Florida, if you own a retail dispensary, you cannot buy weed from any other company. You have to grow it yourself. None of the cannabis can cross state lines, which appears to violate the Commerce Clause and the whole reason why the United States was created in the first place is
Yeah.
that
Well,
you
yeah.
wouldn't have like Georgia saying, we don't want Virginia tobacco. Like that wouldn't
Yeah.
have worked. You wouldn't have
It's the
started
Wisconsin
the
milk case.
yeah, yeah, that's exactly right. And so you have this patchwork of states. Some of them are medical, some are full legal, and they have wildly different rules about how you operate and what is allowed and what isn't. And so you have that situation where you'll have a state like Washington and Oregon where they just let a free for all and the price of marijuana is much lower and it's a much more hyper competitive state. And then you have a state like California that's kind of in the middle where they've allowed a stuff, but it's pretty regulated and it's kind of like in the middle. And then you have something called limited license states, where that's where the state just said, hey, we're going to make this super draconian and we're just going to really tightly regulate this. And it becomes such a high regulatory barrier that the prices and the income that can be earned from cannabis companies are crazy. So just the price differential is like California weed may be $1,800 a pound on a wholesale basis, but in Massachusetts it could be 4 grand, right? And so there's like kind of an outsized profit opportunity. And then you have states that'll open, and I want to say there's like 15 licenses in New Jersey. And they're about to go full legal. Like the illegal market in New Jersey is already massive. And so it's like some of these markets like New Jersey and New York are going to be massively undersupplied for quite some time. And
Yeah,
it's
that
because,
said, real quick, when you have that pricing differential between the legal and the illegal market, I think that it's not, at least today, I think it's a product that the illegal market is a very good substitute for.
well, yeah, but that just let's just say you would just want an edible or you want
Yeah,
like a
I'm
tea or
just I'm
this
just
is
playing
this is
devil's
part of
advocate here,
part
right?
of the reason the legal market is eating the illegal market is kind of a couple of factors. You have choice. It's
Hmm.
not just the flower, right? You have access. You're not going to like your local drug dealer. You have
Yeah.
safety. You know, there's a real company that is being like the safety protocols in cannabis right now, from what I can tell, are some of the toughest
Oh yeah.
of any sector in the United States because of the sensitivity around cannabis. And then there's the quality. You think about what companies can do with size and scale, that the quality of what's coming out is just exceptional in terms of what you can get. So even though the price to the price sensitive consumer or the heavier user, well yeah, of course you grow your own or get from your buddy who can get from somewhere something, of course. But when I look at the larger, broader market and what's really going to drive, it's just so much easier to go down and be like, oh, it's already pre-rolled for me, or I just want to put something underneath my tongue, or I'm just going to have this edible, etc. You have all these different choices, or just have it in my
Yeah.
tea or something. So I think that
No, I
that's
think
part
that's
of the
right.
thing. But
And I
but
think
but
you
the
get like the professional class. Like, I'm not trying to risk my family because I went to some drug dealer on the corner. Like, no way, right?
that
So
that's
if I can
that's
just
the
go to the store, it's much easier.
yeah, no, for sure. But over time, you are right. They should normalize, even without that, you'll eventually get the capacity. I think that what people see though is there's two different aspects to kind of the way I'm thinking about it. And I'm still processing it here. It's very important that I don't view myself as like some huge expert. I just don't see many other people analyzing or researching this industry who are either generalists or don't have like a private equity fund focused on cannabis or a hedge fund cannabis fund. Is you need to separate out two different aspects of what may or may not come. The first part is wholesale, which is that if interstate commerce does come, well, then you're going to be growing it in the places where every other kind of agriculture grows from it. And I'll get into that. And then you have the actual distribution and the retail outlet. And
Yeah.
so this is what's really important. If we're in Virginia or New Hampshire right now, you can only buy hard alcohol from a state liquor store.
Yep.
That is
Yeah.
not affected by the interstate commerce clause.
That
And
makes sense.
so
So
you're
the
going to have
game
a
is to get your
lot of
distribution
value.
locked in.
You're going to have a lot of value in the companies that have the distribution to the customer, the retail storefronts that can figure out a way that they're controlling the distribution to the customer on one end in the long term, whenever that happens. And then on the other end, you're going to have companies that have size and scale and are in the right places that are going to just blow everyone out of the water eventually. And so like the way that I'm thinking about it is like, when was the last time you had like Florida wine or
Yeah, no,
or,
I
or
agree with
Ohio
that.
wine? And if you think about, I think the analog, and this is why California to me is so interesting, is where is all the lettuce grown in the US? It's
It's
like
got to I
Monterey
mean, it's got to be
County.
Yeah,
It's California. Where
California.
are all the
Yeah.
wine? Where's all the
Yeah.
grapes?
Yeah, they
Where
got
are
some
all
good
the
soil out there.
avocados? All
Avocado.
the
Yeah, I was just
avocados.
going to say, yeah.
Any kind of plant. And I hear I think one of the most unhelpful or silly ways to look at cannabis is to say, how is this different than corn or wheat? Well, one, you can't get high on corn or wheat unless you, unless you
Yeah,
process it, right?
that's
So
right. Yeah.
The
Get some
better
good
question
shine.
is, and you can grow corner wheat anywhere, it doesn't matter,
Yeah.
right? Cannabis is actually a very sensitive plant. And if you don't grow it right, you may have, to grow it to the right kind of THC level and the right kind of, and do all of that is actually a sensitive plant. You got to control the sunlight. You got to keep like a very narrow band of the weather, and you got to, and that's why most outdoor cannabis is actually used for like oil.
Yeah.
It's all the indoor and greenhouse that's used for the stuff that you want to consume. And so does it make sense? You think about the say I'm in Santa Barbara, California. The weather's amazing, okay? The same weather that people love, sensitive plants and trees love. And that's why the so much agriculture is in California, is because you don't have to regulate the temperature or heat or cool it, which requires tremendous energy and tremendous inputs into the system. And so eventually, most of the cannabis in this country should be grown in those areas, which are California, Oregon, Washington. It's going to be here. And
Yeah.
and you just need to balance those things. And this is why you may have these limited licenses last for a very long time. You may not have clarity on federal rules. Even if the federal rules came in, the states may litigate it for years. It may go on for a very, very long time, right? And then you have the combination of the stigma going down, usage going up, and so you think about kind of those things. And that's why it's important that when I'm looking in the cannabis space, I'm looking for what I appear either inefficiencies or value. Because you remember going back to our beginning, I'm looking for low downside, uncertain upside. So when I'm
Yeah.
looking at the limited MSOs, I'm looking for those where if I'm wrong, I'm paying 7 times next year's cash flow and the cash flow gets cut in half. Well, then, okay, I'm at, 14 or 15 next year,
Real
but it's still
quick.
growing at like 50% a year, and they control all the dispensaries, which
Yeah, real
no
quick though.
law
The
will take
cash
away.
flow that we're talking about, for anybody that hasn't looked at this, when you open up the income statements, know that we're talking about EBITDA, because your
Yeah,
interest rate is artificially high and your taxes are insane right now because of this clause
because of
280E.
IRS 280E rules. So this is the other thing you got to get comfortable with. It's kind of a mess, but
It's a total mess.
it's a mess on the kind of the financial statements, but you can break down kind of the unit economics, and you can see the value of what's being created, and you can run the numbers of what these are created. And when things the IRS is already looking on normalizing. They're already talking in their subcommittees.
Yeah, I saw that
The
article.
the tobacco, I don't want to say the ATF, whatever the licensing board is already talking about packaging and standardizing. Like a lot of this stuff is starting to be worked through the regulatory, and so when things become more legal or it gets downgraded so that you don't have these, it will be treated like everything else. That's part of my thesis. Is I believe that it will be treated like everything else. And when it's treated like everything else, the reason why most investors are looking at EBITDA, which normally I would not use, I would use free cash flow, is because you have, to your point, artificially high interest rates because they have limited access to the banking system, and artificially high taxes because they're not able to deduct many expenses like any other normal business is able to. And so we're using EBITDA as like a proxy for what
Yeah.
a normalization.
I have thought
So
about
when
this.
I'm looking at it, so what attracts me is when I look on an EBITDA basis and I can find a company that's growing at like 50 to 100%. And I think that there's significant regulatory barriers for them to earn outsized profits. for the next 3 to 5 years with gigantic tailwinds, and you're paying 7 times the next year's numbers, that does not feel like the right valuation to me.
Yeah. No, I think that that's fair. The other thing that's kind of interesting about the whole setup is I might be wrong on this, but I think I'm right. I'm almost certain I'm right. Is the leverage profile in that industry is structurally lower than it
That's exactly
otherwise
right.
maybe would be optimal, right? So there's almost once these issues get sorted out, you can recap them if you wanted to, right? But there's the potential. So there's a structurally more conservative financial profile in the industry than will probably exist in the end state, and that can
And
be
not only
pretty
that, you
good.
can't margin. So we're just in the news about margin blowups and all this crazy speculative behavior, both professionally and retail. You can't borrow. I don't know anyone who would possibly let you borrow against these stocks that trade on
Yeah,
secondary exchanges or tertiary foreign exchanges. I don't know of one that exists. So you don't. Not
yeah,
only do you not have the leverage in the company's balance sheets, but you don't have the leverage from the investors investing in it as well. And the final kind of lens to put on top of it is cannabis is legal in Canada. Okay. And because of that, Canadian cannabis companies not only trade on the Toronto Stock Exchange, but they also trade on the New York Stock Exchange because those Canadian companies are not violating US law. They're just operating according to what's in Canada. And so you
yeah,
can actually look at
yeah. The
companies
valuation
like
disparity.
Tilray and Canopy Growth and these companies, and they have, I don't even know what the right way to describe it is, ridiculous market caps and valuations. Like
Yeah,
totally absurd. Like they're not profitable at all. Lower growth rates, smaller addressable markets. And you'll look at a company like Tilray and you're like, I don't get it. How does this trade 41 million shares a day? And a company like what I own, Air Wellness, is lucky if it trades 300,000 shares a day. Air is
yeah.
cash flow positive, growing significantly faster, has much greater runway and total addressable market. And Tilray not only trade 41 million shares versus 300,000, but Tilray literally trades multiples of the valuation to I don't even know how you justify. And the craziest thing is to watch and you realize that there are investors who are trying to play the cannabis trend by buying the only things they're allowed, which is
Yeah, yeah,
Tilray and these others. And like on Robinhood right now, you cannot buy Air Wellness or any of the, GTII or Cresco or any of the, I believe, really well run US cannabis companies that are building significant businesses, cash flow positive, professionally managed, have size and scale. You can't on Robinhood buy them.
yeah,
If you're prime brokering with Pershing, you can't buy them. They won't let you buy them. And
yeah.
so I think these investors and look at like Grow Generation. This is a company that like the picks and shovels, right? They sell hydroponics and all the equipment to grow all that stuff. Or you'll see Scott's Miracle Grow, or there's another
Yeah,
company
somebody
called
wrote me. Somebody wrote, and I appreciate it. I'm not trying to like laugh at it at all. I appreciate it, but somebody wrote me, and they were like, "You should look at Scott's as a weed play." And I was like, "Yeah, I kind of like the weed play as a weed play.
Yeah, yeah, no,
I
but
should call it
they've
cannabis.
been
I
right.
shouldn't
It's
call it
done
weed."
well. All these companies
Yeah.
have done well, but if you look at the valuations, I think it reflects. There's another one called Innovative Properties. This is a REIT
Yep.
that owns the properties that cannabis, but they're not touching the plant. And because they're not touching the plant, they're allowed to trade on the New York Stock Exchange or Nasdaq or and the valuation it's at like a three cap or some
Yeah.
crazy thing, and any legal version or tangential adjacent cannabis that trades on a major exchange that isn't restricted in any way trades at, absurd valuations. So you know that the investor demand is there. And so what I am so attracted and why I'm doing research into it and why I own some US cannabis companies and I'm doing so much work and I'm talking about it as well is I love the idea of a super large market. It's growing really fast that very few people can invest in. And then I believe in the future they will be able to.
Yeah. I don't have a large position. I think it's like 3-ish%. But the funds flow thesis is just like, I mean, I said it earlier, it's just like too compelling when I look at all of the structural barriers. And like, I'm not comfortable saying, okay, well, the Canadian comps are trading here, the US comps are trading here, therefore there's like the US comps should move to the Canadian comps. But what I am confident in saying is some of the flow is going to come out of the Canadian companies and go to the US companies. And I also don't think the people that own the US shares are going to be super eager to sell right away. I mean, you've got like a group of people that have a real thesis here, and I don't want to get a
Well, no,
too
I think you
like
could just look at
into
the
the
real valuation. I was just
yeah.
pointing out that you can see that
No,
wherever
I know.
this capital can go to, you have crazy valuations. That's part of the capital flow thesis. But just
Yeah.
independent of that, say there was no other comp that you could look to, when I look at a company and I say, "Hey, I can buy it for a single digit multiple and and I can map to 50 to 100% revenue growth for the next couple of years." And then maybe it slows down to like 15 or 20%. And then if I handicap that like some of their outsized profits kind of get reduced to a more national kind of state and model to that, I just don't believe that I think you have this situation where you have this really low downside, huge industry, and the upside's uncertain, and I'll take that risk kind of any day of the week. At the same time, you have one of the more speculative, frothy markets that I've seen in
Yeah.
my 25-year investment career.
No, I agree
So,
with that. And I wasn't trying to put words in your mouth. I guess I'm not fully there on some of the questions that I like if somebody said to me, are you buying this business on like a true long-term thesis? I still have some things to work out on that. But for me, I've done enough work to get comfortable with what you're saying, and I know enough to know that if I'm only in it for the funds flow thesis, that's good enough for me for now. And I
well, let me
continue to
let me
work
tell
to
you,
get my head around the other things.
I'm really so I am over the wall on and that's a euphemism that I am restricted from commenting or trading in a certain issue company that I am happy to ping you and anyone who pings me or after listening to this when it's posted can ask me what this company is. I believe it's almost any moment this is I believe there is going to be a new kind of it already exists, but a new name in the industry that I actually think is going to be the most important cannabis company in America. I plan to
Hmm.
write about it. I'm happy to share it with you. And it will provide an opportunity to invest in a large existing market, but they will have the size and scale and cost of operating that will be so far below everyone else that not only will they do well if the current limited model continues, but that they will thrive in an interstate commerce. And
Hmm.
so,
Yeah, that would
this
interest
is
me.
part of what interests me so much is that I can come across this where normally if there was no restrictions on anyone, it would be like me trying to become an investor in Stripe, right? Like
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and it's
yeah,
like I have zero chance of being an investor in Stripe or getting in on Coinbase or,
yeah.
any of these like
Well, you got to
Roblox
be
before it
right
went
on
public.
so much, right? Like, I mean,
And so this is why you do the
yeah,
work. This is why you research. You go ahead and you ask those tough questions, which you're right. What happens at that? But then you say, Well, of course, there's going to be a company that's going to have size and scale and it's going to dominate it. And then
Yeah.
I hear this dumb stuff like, oh, Philip Morris is just going to get into it. It's like, well, what do they know about cannabis? And where are they going to grow it? And at what size and scale? And then you got to say, well, it's more likely going to be in California, Oregon, or Washington, right? And then you got to look at, well, what does scale look like? What is the process to get a greenhouse approved in
Yeah.
California? I live here. I don't know if you've ever
It's
tried
gonna
to
be
do
tough.
business in the
No, dude,
People's
I'm
Republic of
certain it's
California,
tough.
but let me tell you, there is an old company that I wrote up many, many years ago called Limonera, largest grower of avocados in the country. Okay. And they said, hey, we want to take some of the avocados and just build some houses on it. We have too much land for avocados. Okay. And so they start working on it in 2003. I think they finally sold their first home in 2017. And that was a home. That was a home. And there's no one there. There's no one there. It's not like they're taking over the neighborhood and people are going to miss
Yeah.
all this stuff. They owned all the water
Oof.
rights. There was, it was probably a water and housing play, and they're selling the homes now. And so I look at that, and like in Santa Barbara, very liberal place. The craziest thing about California is how super conservative it is around anything to do with land or buildings or anything. People think of
Hmm.
California
Yeah.
as this like liberal bastion, and they are, except when it comes to any kind of land usage. And then it is the most difficult place in the world. And so, what's going to happen, I believe, is you're going to have companies that have the capacity to produce and operate under size and scale, and it will be extremely difficult. And they'll be able to take advantage of the California sunlight and the moderate weather, and they will be able to outcompete because they're going to have cost advantages over trying to cool, marijuana plants in the Florida summer heat.
Yeah. No, I like that idea. The other thing that I like about the industry is how good the data is. Like I was looking at the Florida sales and it's pretty amazing how good TrueLeave is. Like their throughput and, I mean, people speak very highly of Kim and I tried to get her on the pod, but she said she wasn't available. I guess shout out to the people that have been doing the work and
You
deserve
know
her
what?
more than I
I
do. But
missed
one
out
day,
on
hopefully.
Yeah, I missed out on True Leave. The other part, and this is just a comment, it's not specific to, well, so the thing that stopped me with True Leave is her husband is under indictment from on federal corruption charges, I believe. And from what I can tell, they've done a great job with their Florida operations. But the other part of the cannabis sector that you should know is it is like the Wild West.
Yeah.
Like there are people that are unethical. Like I don't know if you followed MedMen at all. They're not unethical, but just
Yeah.
way in over their heads, raise lots of
My
capital. We're gonna do X, Y, and Z, and then they just
I don't
don't.
know, man. I think they're kind of unethical. If I am correct on that name, and it may not be that name, so confirm what I'm about to say. But I'm pretty sure my buddy was early in it, and then there was something in the documents that like basically capped his upside. And
Yeah.
I mean,
Oh
he
no.
signed the documents, so that's on
Yeah.
him. But also, it's like he didn't get the deal he thought he was getting.
And then you have these people who are just in over their heads, right? Or who aren't. The companies that I would direct you to are the ones that are operationally focused, that have
Yeah,
brought in the people, the COO of like Pepsi, or, you know, you want to see this is like anything else, this is going to be a size and scale, and the management team becomes of critical importance, and that you just don't want the things that I've tried to avoid is like, I want great management teams and I don't want any hint of impropriety or any kind of concern because there's already the federal illegality and
yeah,
so I find that because there's so few professional investors, the use of this wide gamut of valuations and people investing or saying stuff and using stocks as proxy without really doing much in the way of due diligence. An interesting company is the parent company, which was basically a bunch of assets and like Jay-Z sprinkled on top
Yeah.
that may or may not do interesting things and is California based, right? So may play into the thesis. And I looked into it and I couldn't understand what they owned or what their strategy was. And you looked into what their financial forecasts were, and it's like, oh, we're going to go from this super low margin wholesale to like delivery with 25% EBITDA margins. And I couldn't make heads or tails. And they may succeed, they may not. I mean, Jay-Z's been a pretty fabulous businessman. So maybe that will work on the branding side. But there's all these different companies that are saying different things. And that's also what makes it fascinating and why I haven't gone whole hog. I only have three investments in the cannabis
Yeah.
space, and it's held me back from frankly making more money last year is just being very, very cautious, right? Because I want my downside to be low. I want
Yeah.
I don't want to take the risk. This is just how I'm building my portfolio. And so I continue to do research. I continue to dig in this industry. And I think that I found the company that I'm going to make the biggest position that I have that addresses almost every concern that I have about the industry that you have. And
Hmm.
that long term, if Anheuser-Busch decides they want to get into cannabis, or Philip Morris, this company has to be the first phone call.
Hmm.
And so that's
That's an
how I'm thinking
intriguing
about it.
idea. Yeah,
I'm
that's
just
an
sorry that
intriguing
I'm
idea.
restricted from telling you, but I
Well,
promise you the minute it becomes public, I'll DM you and then I promise I'll write about it, share it as well.
all right, cool. Yeah. I look forward to
And you
that.
know what? I guarantee you as well that I will put you in touch with the president of this company and you can interview him as well. He's an
Oh, cool. I'd like to.
incredible human being. And there's even this amazing story of how I passed on the idea. I actually know this person. I passed on the idea about 18 months ago. Because I was
Hmm.
like, I'm interested in the industry. Do I want to make a private investment? What am I doing? And it was at a time when the cannabis sector wasn't doing great
Hmm.
publicly. And I was like,
Yeah.
and then I passed on it. They opened a dispensary a block from my office, like, I don't
Hmm.
know, 6, 9 months later. I want you to imagine that I drive by this twice a day, and
Yeah.
it's like someone's kicking me in the nuts every
Yeah.
single
It just
day.
reminds you over and over
With
and
the
over again.
line, the line. I'm
Yeah.
looking at the line every day and being like, I'm the genius that passed on that,
Yeah.
right? And with the backdrop of the management team that I think is incredible. Like I'm the genius that just did this every day.
Yeah.
So you can imagine my surprise when I suddenly get the opportunity the second time around to invest. And let me tell you, it's like Christmas came early for me. So I'm
That's
very
awesome.
excited.
That's cool. I first of all want to thank you for being so emphatic and enthusiastic and walking through that thesis. It's a thesis that I think is really interesting out there. And I also really like your thoughts on how Mexico is a strategic partner of the US. And I guess what I would say is if we had all day, I would go on and on with you.
For sure.
But I would really encourage people, first of all, where can people find you? Your Substack and your Twitter.
I think it's mindsetvalue.substack.com, and they can find me on Twitter. It's just Aaron, Aaron, value.com. I also have mindsetcapital.com. There are a bunch of deep dive research reports that I just share. You can find links to.
Awesome. All right, cool. Because I do think that, like one of the things that's cool about following Aaron is I always feel like I'm outside of the echo chamber when I'm in your feed.
Oh,
And
thank
I
you.
appreciate that, right? Like I think that you're bringing something that's different to my feed than normally is there, and I always appreciate that. So I would heavily encourage people to think about it or to follow you. The one thing I do want to cover before you go, though, is I'd like to talk to you about the book that you wrote and the idea of a 6-day work week and what that's done for you and sort of how you think about that.
Yeah, so I think the thing that you should know First off, is that I'm a workaholic. I don't know why, but I'm driven in ways that I don't fully appreciate. And then, kind of like when we were talking about our greatest strength and our greatest weakness, it's like I can be my own worst enemy. And so when I talk about when I managed money the first time, and I did objectively well. I started above my parents' garage, grew that to like $25 million, had a great long-term track record, but I was really, really hard on myself and really harsh. And I experienced stress levels that were just frankly not healthy. And, I found myself one day where I found myself just crying in the shower, just kind of overwhelmed with how I was living my life, which was all work, and work was who I was. And so if work's who you are, then that means that I am my stocks. And if my stocks underperform or I don't do well, then that's a reflection of who I am and my worth in the world. It not only wasn't healthy, but it, in hindsight, looking back, wasn't necessary. And I think I would have actually had a better uh, long term track record if I had just built some more safeguards or space in my life that wasn't work. And so I actually kind of hit rock bottom after I had very briefly taken on a partner and fought with him and, with fell in love with a woman and that fell apart and then got sick and doctors didn't know what
Oh
was
man,
wrong with
that's
me.
tough. That's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and then I literally had 3 or 4 years where I was like a golden god. Like I want you to imagine from like managing money from like 99 to 2002 and averaging 28% a year up every year. Like, right? Like you were
Wow.
just, but I didn't know I was so young. It was like, I didn't know that if you have an alternative contrarian viewpoint, that there are periods where you underperform, right? Or I
Yeah.
just didn't fully
Yeah.
appreciate what that meant. And it's really hard to just perform every year. And so I started struggling in the beginning of 2003. And so all these things hit me. Eventually, it was like a misdiagnosed appendicitis, and they took it out, and and it was anyway. So all these things happen in the summer. I just
Dude,
went into
that's
a
a tough time in life, huh?
yeah, I was just single, went through a deep depression and just floundering.
I
And
had when
yeah,
I'm not trying to make this about me, but just to reciprocate a little bit about like life downs. When that flooring company that I tried, like I tried that with my best friend. Well, there's three of us that were basically brothers. And I tried that with him. And when that thing failed, there was a period there that I didn't know if I would lose my business and my friend. And that was really fucking hard.
yeah.
But, thankfully we made it through that. But man, when you start to get the personal stuff and the business stuff colliding, I mean, that was the darkest period that I've ever been in. Certainly the most unconfident.
And one of the things I really appreciate is what you talk about, and I see it's a lot more accepted today and a lot more discussed, is just the importance of mental health and acknowledging that you can go through dark periods and that there are people that are more susceptible to depression or, mental health troubles. And but back then it was your macho man, rub some dirt in it, and it at least
Yeah.
felt that way. And
Yeah.
no one admitted weakness. Like if you admit weakness, you are weak, right?
Yeah.
And so, but I hit this dart, and I was like, this just isn't working for me. This is 2003, and then I grew up Jewish, but just like very reform, and so just I started. I need to create a foundation or some kind of life outside of stocks, outside of investments. And so, I went through this whole process. And then eventually, like 2 years later, I decided, really out of desperation, I got out of that depression and I actually moved to California and literally with like knowing no one and was like, I need there to be no excuse not to be outside. I need a phone, a
Hmm.
computer, and that's it. Like that.
Oh, that's
And it's,
cool.
so that's part of why I'm here. I mean, I tell the story in my book, but I need it to be like, why are you not outside? Like, why are you not outside?
Yeah.
Like, that's how driven I can just get lost, like literally lost. So working so hard. So anyway, so I started picking the pieces up, became a big brother and like, started getting involved in my community and doing all kinds of things like that. And then, but it still wasn't enough. And it's still, back then there was the BlackBerry, the Crackberry, and,
Yeah, you
working
saw
all
the
the
red
time.
blinking light.
And I wasn't getting necessarily better performance by working more. So your first thought is, oh, I'm not getting the results that I want. I got to double down, right? I got to work
Yeah.
even harder. And then finally, out of desperation, I said, this isn't working. And so I said, I'm going to fall back on just out of the tradition. And I'm going to try to turn off my phone. And when I go to sleep at night on Friday night, and try to make it till noon on Saturday.
Hmm.
And I'm not going to think about work in the morning, and I'm going to try that. And that seemed like a Herculean task to me, right? Because essentially, like, I
Yeah.
didn't have kids then or married. I didn't really have much. You're talking about 4 or 5 hours at best, right? Okay. And so I did it. I was like, well, I can actually turn off my phone. I actually don't have to look at computer or emails or read or do anything about business. And
Yeah.
then after a couple of weeks, I was like, maybe I can make it to 2 or 3. Then I did it at 2 or 3. And then after a couple of months, I was like, I can do the whole day. I can actually take a Sabbath. And the Jewish Sabbath is from Friday night to Saturday night. And I did it, and it transformed my life. It not only transformed my life, and I've now been doing it, I don't know, for 14 or 15 years. One, it's the best thing that I do in my life by far. Looking back now, I I can't go back. I
Hmm.
don't know how everybody stays on call, whether they respond or not, on call to every single person they know in business and in their personal life at every waking hour.
Yeah.
Like, that just sounds really bad to me. Or just like, why would you do that? Right? Like, you're like a doctor, but no one needs you for emergency medicine. It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and so, but I started doing that. And what I found is that I have this cycle now where the first thing when I turn off, it's this relief, right? Like this weight off my shoulders. And then I have this rest. I have this rest recovery. And then by the time I'm ready to turn back on at night, it's this renewal
Hmm.
where I'm not burned out. I'm now excited. What did I miss?
Yeah.
What is on Twitter? What did Bill say? Or
Oh
what
God.
podcast just dropped?
Hopefully
No, no,
somebody
no.
better than that.
No, no, no. But it's like, I wonder what
I'm
went
just
on.
joking. I'm
The
joking.
most remarkable thing is how little happens on Saturday outside of
Yeah.
sports. That's the thing that you find all these benefits. So I find this. So by the time I'm already feeling it and it's Thursday, you start to get in this rhythm where by the end of the week, you just start becoming exhausted because the rest of the week I am grinding. And
Yeah.
I know that I have this break coming up where
Hmm.
I can release. And it's so I can grind harder and more. And then what happens is I get this cycle where I get, okay, now I'm back up again. And then what happens is if you're not doing business, your phone isn't on, you're not checking Twitter, you're not trying to improve yourself, what comes into your mind? Well, one is I just try to enjoy myself. I will watch TV. It's not like I'm some strict person, but nothing about business or politics. I'm not trying to improve myself. And I try to just enjoy myself. And what happens is I'll have ideas suddenly pop into my head. Oh, I never thought of that. Oh, that's a great idea. Oh, yes. What about this? And then the larger questions of life inevitably come in. Am I living life the right way? Am I satisfied? Am I living a meaningful life? Am I a good friend? Am I a good husband? Am I a good father? And, just the difference between me with my phone and any of my children, I have 3 young kids. I'll be with my daughter, even at a young age. And if I have my phone out, like let's say she does something cute, I'll take a picture of her. And then, oh, there's a message. Oh, I got to check that. And then she'll immediately turn and would be like, oh, Papa, will you play with me? Well, wait, I am playing with you. But no, she knows
Yeah.
that I don't have her full attention, or my
Yeah, she
attention is
doesn't
not
have
on
yours.
her.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And so the difference between being present,
Yeah.
understanding that our life is dominated by the value of our life. Once you get past a certain income level and you're not really worried about paying the bills, all of our life is based on relationships. And
Yeah.
who are the most important people in your life? And so one day a week, I'm making sure that I'm paying attention to my family. I'll get together with friends. But if I schedule something on Saturday, it'll be like one thing. And then
Yeah.
imagine, instead of just shoving food in my mouth, that you can just have a meal that just like rolls along. There's no end date,
Yeah.
there's nothing after it. I'm not going running to some other schedule. And so I started doing this and it just transformed my life. I found business wise, I started making more money. I started
Hmm.
making better decisions. And then remember how I told you how I was like, oh, I had an almost complete nervous breakdown in 2003. Do you know what my performance was in 2003 that drove that? How much money do you think I lost that year?
Oh man, I'm gonna say something silly, like maybe down 5%.
Yeah, I was down like 3%.
Yeah. I mean,
And
I
then
figured
so
just
imagine
knowing
2008,
how
Matt.
hard you must have been on
Yeah,
yourself,
yeah.
you
So
know. Yeah.
2008 rolls around, and now I have a greater foundation. I have,
Yeah.
I
Isn't it a
have,
good thing you did that work?
yeah. No, it turns out to be a blessing in disguise.
Yeah,
Now I
no
take
doubt.
the day off. I understand that my portfolio is not me, that I'm doing my best. 2008 rolls around, and I'm down 40%. Everyone's down 40%. At least everyone that I knew or followed. Was I stressed? Yes. Was it the end of the world? No. And in fact, I was able to then think about, well, hey, how can I take advantage of this? And that's when I decided, hey, there's an opportunity in single family rentals, in housing, in foreclosures. And no one's focused on this. So in March of 2009, I launched a totally new business. 2003, Aaron, would not have been able to do that.
Yeah.
And I believe it's because of the Sabbath, because I
Do you
had
think
this cycle. I had this break.
was it hard? I understand that you just said that you came up with it, but I'm curious as to whether or not, even though it was a good idea, and obviously a good idea in retrospect, when you had it, was some of your identity tied to being a public market investor? Like, was it difficult to switch to the home thesis, or was your identity, like,
It
at
was just
least
a
your work
side
identity,
project.
close
I,
to?
I thought of
Yeah.
it as a
Okay.
side project of like, hey, I'm
Yeah.
just gonna. I thought of it almost as like a private version of public stock. I was gonna buy it.
Yeah. That
I was
makes
gonna
sense.
rent them out, and then just it's just an opportunity to me. But so instead of like being in fear or anxious, instead I was looking for opportunity. And so
You know, it's
then it goes to the American home, right? And I tell the story in the book, but it wasn't like a linear thing. I went nuts. In one year, I bought 2,000 homes individually. And I was trying to buy so many homes that we almost ran out of money. I almost didn't have payroll for the people in my company. I was like 3 weeks away. Like I was, there were crazy stresses that had happened. And then, we righted the ship and there were all the, ups and downs, and then sold to a publicly traded real estate fund or a company, a REIT. And then I looked back in the company, and I used to model inside my company. I was like, hey, Friday night to Saturday night, I'm off. And I would be
yeah.
like, find your break, try to, and I would tell people. And the funny thing is, when you're not by yourself or just with another, I had one or two employees at my money management firm, at the peak, the American home, we were 180 people, something, it's a crazy amount,
That's
just
cool.
imagine. And I learned a lot. I made a ton of mistakes, but I was able to watch all this work behavior. And there was one guy who was in the renovation division of my company, and he used to say, "Oh man, I'm putting in the third shift tonight." And I was like, "Oh wow, gosh, what's the third shift?" And that was well after I that's after midnight, and I was like, "Oh man, this guy's a really hard worker." And then when we suddenly had grown too fast and we needed to look why weren't the main problem that we ran into is it's super easy to buy. It's very hard to operate. So I
Yeah.
was buying
Yeah.
2 or 300 homes a month, but renting 50. You don't
Yeah.
need many
Okay.
months before that becomes a problem, right?
Yep. Yep.
And so we went under the hood and looked. Turns out this guy was our least effective employee, was creating chaos. And then I was watching other people. I remember one guy in our finance department, we give him responsibility and he would do it. And then we'd give him more and do it. And then all of a sudden he just started showing up and he'd be sick or wouldn't show up. And then one day he just didn't come into the office. And we just broke him. We literally just broke him. Like we just
Huh.
ran him into the ground. And so on when I sold the company, after watching all of this behavior, and myself included when I was working, you realize how much of work behavior is either for show or incredibly destructive.
Yeah.
And it is not, for a lot of people, it's about like a badge of honor. And it's not about, to me, it's about results. It's about how effective you are at your job. And so I decided, I was like, wait a minute, these two are connected. That's when I decided, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to dive really deep, just like I would do for an investment. And I'm going to make the business case for what I've been doing personal. And so I went after, looking for companies and people that take the Sabbath in some way, shape, or form. I went to look for studies. And eventually, I had no idea it was going to take so long and it was so hard. It took me 3.5 years because I'm like, this is something I'm passionate about. I'm not going to make money. I didn't make money from the book. I want to help people. I don't want people to
Yeah.
have the same experience that I had. And you just look around, you see all this pain and suffering and people killing themselves for really no reason. And so it ended up called The Hard Break, the case for a 24/6 lifestyle. I have 200 footnotes in the book. My editor
Oh
had
my
me rip
gosh.
out dozens. It's like, you're not
Yeah.
writing a scientific journal. Because it turns out that when you do the research, you find that the way that we're working and the way we're interacting with technology is bad for you. It's bad for your health. It's bad for your mental health. It's bad for your business. It's bad for your marriage. It's bad for everything. Like
Yeah.
it's so overwhelming in the stories. And I was able to like talk to the top executives of Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A's closed every Sunday.
Yeah.
How are they so wildly successful? And talking to other, Dustin Moskowitz, one of the co-founders or the beginning executives at Facebook, talked about how even though he made all this money, he almost destroyed his life by his work habits, and he was a terrible boss. And his new company, Asana, is now doing very, very well, and they are ranked like the number one or number two best company to work for, and they have incredible limits on stopping people from working. And so what I'm trying to spread the message, and I'm really glad you asked about this whole I've got to kill myself to be successful, and I've got to burn myself out, and that's the price you pay for success, is a lie. It doesn't mean you don't work hard, or there are periods where you work hard, but that you'll actually be more successful if you take a break. And there's a bunch, there's all kinds of studies, but let me tell you the biggest thing that's really hit me. And that is when you find that what is going to make people successful in today's world? It's not about how much you know. It's not going to be the crazy amounts of energy you can expend. I actually firmly believe it's going to be how creative and innovative you're going to be and how good your decision making is going to be. And so when
Mm.
you look
Yeah.
into the data, turns out that when you're daydreaming, or you're not actively engaged, there's a part of your brain called the default mode network that goes into overdrive to process all the information your brain has taken in and forms patterns. Have you ever had the proverbial idea in the shower? Or you're going
Yeah,
for a
yeah,
walk somewhere and suddenly an idea hits you? It's because you don't know it, but there's a part of your brain that's processing and understanding the world. And so imagine that all of these people are almost on purpose without knowing it, reducing their ability to create, to have creative ideas and innovative ideas and better decision and have a greater understanding of what's going on with them by being on all the time and being busy
yeah.
all the time. It's absurd.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. It's hard when you're young and you're working in a group that is arguably understaffed to not. I mean, you gotta bust it, right? But then you got to take time too.
No,
It's
but here's what the data shows. This is the most one of the best stories. So World War One hits. Germany is kicking butt in World War One, and Britain suspends all labor laws. Because of the Industrial Revolution, things got really bad in Britain, labor-wise, and they instituted all some of these protections. Well, war comes, you've got to eliminate everything. Everyone's going to go all out. They get to a
yeah,
point where they're like, "Hey, we got to increase our munitions manufacturing. How are we going to do it?" So they put together a commission. And the commission is given every resource and they can interview everybody, they can get all the data they want, and they come back. And what do they recommend? They find that the people that are the most productive are the people that take the Sunday off.
yeah,
And they find that they don't hurt themselves as much. They're more productive when they're not working, and they're actually the people working 7 days a week are almost less productive than the people that are working 5 days a week. So it's a lie because we need a break. We need a break. We're going to get injured. We're going to get sick. We're going to have mental issues. You're going to hurt yourself. That event, you look, if you decided for the next 3 weeks that you're going to work every waking hour, you could do it. And could you bang out a project? Absolutely. The problem is it never stops there.
yeah,
Then the next thing comes, and then the next thing. And with email, it's like infinite. This was my problem. If you're curious and you're interested in investments, you never can stop.
yeah. It is really. I mean, I think it's probably a disease that we all suffer from, but like, I can't turn it off. Sometimes I wish I could. And I want to be clear in what I'm saying. I just mean like I drive around and I'm always thinking about investments generally, an idea. Like I can't shut it down. And that's something that I need to work on a little bit. I think that it's, what you're saying, I think rhymes with the case for meditation, with the case for a lot of things. And I guess one of the things that I've been thinking about recently is probably the importance for me to do a little bit of work on some stuff that I sort of carry from, I don't know if it's childhood or whatever. I guess just saying it out loud. I mean, I think I should enter into a little like therapy for a little while, because the way that my career is morphing and the way that, like, I recently flipped on Naked Wines. I like that product. I really hope that the people that I know that are long it, make a lot of money in it. And I just can't lose on that bet for reasons that I am worried about. I just couldn't deal with myself if I lost on it and didn't act. But I was thinking about it and I was like, okay, well, why is commitment bias so hard? And why is it hard when you publicly say that you're long something to change? And for me, I don't know. I think there's something that goes back. Maybe it's being a product of divorce or some sort of pleasing mechanism or whatever. And I don't really know what it is. But, I talked about how, like, I love Stern, right? One of the reasons that I think Stern is so fantastic, at least the later Stern, is he really got control of his mind and he really understood how things work in his head. And he's able to relate in ways that, aren't, it's not the shock jock, it's the guy that actually understands things about life. And he's able to connect with people in ways that otherwise, he would not be able to. I think that a little more rest and visiting some of that stuff that I probably have, I just haven't spent a lot of time working on it lately. I've done plenty in the past, but I don't know. I think it's something that I'm passionate about. I've obviously had some life issues that I've talked about publicly. There's, some that I haven't. One of the ways that I got over some of the stuff was I found myself in a men's group and I'm like screaming at a chair once. And I remember when, it's like I forget what the type of therapy is, but it like creates this, you like get enraged and then there's a voice in a room and it represents something to you. And like, I remember looking at it and I was sitting there. I was like, what in the hell am I about to do? This is so stupid. And like, there's no way that this can actually, do anything for me. And it was, I don't think I could be the person that I am with it had I not gone through that. And I'm not saying everybody should go to therapy or anything like that, but I do think that being really in touch with your own mind and where your mind is going and why it's going there, it's very, very hard for me to see how people can be good investors and hide from that stuff because that stuff
I
creeps up
completely agree.
at the wrong
I
times.
No, I could not agree more. And that's why the mental aspect of this is so important because
Yeah.
all we're doing at the end of the day is making decisions. And how can if you're not, if you don't have like a healthy balance or, like look at an incredible investor like Dan Loeb. He is, as far as I can tell, he's been doing meditation from the beginning. And you find that many of the great investors have something in their toolkit or they're
Yeah.
doing they understand, to your point of talking about Stern, they understand your mind. When the older I've gotten, the more I've realized that understanding yourself, doing the work not only improves you as a person, it improves the relationships in your life, but it improves how you operate in the world no matter what you do. And you start asking, the reason why is that the world can seem, some things can seem so important, especially if they're like urgent and everybody's talking about it. But there are so many things that are just more important, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
have you seen any of the happiness studies of how happiness surges once you're like past 60? I think it's past
I have
60.
seen that. I
And then
have
part
seen
of it
that.
is that people get to a place where they're like, "Oh my
They're
gosh,
comfortable with themselves.
I'm
Yeah. And they're
comfortable
just
with
like, yeah.
myself and I don't care. All these other things I thought I cared about, I don't."
Yeah.
And
That's
this
right.
is why to me the Sabbath is so important. Is because one day a week I'm reminded of myself is, does it matter if Air Wellness goes up or down? Well, I mean, I guess, yeah. Do I want it to go up? Yes. But like, how does that compare to me spending time playing with my daughter at this age, or
Yeah.
going for a walk with my wife, or even more important, just taking a nap? How much better do I do when I just take a nap? And you know what I
Yeah.
allow myself to do on my Sabbath? I try to do only stuff I really enjoy. So I just realized, most of my job as an investor is to read. I'm not reading for fun. I'm listening to like your podcast with Adam Robinson. I'm trying to learn. I'm
Yeah.
trying to improve who I am as an investor, as a professional. On the Sabbath, there is no self-improvement. I like to read good old fantasy book or science fiction
Yeah.
about some far off planet. And you
Yeah.
know what? I realize I love to read for pure enjoyment.
Yeah.
And it gives me so much joy. I also really love playing video games. I have zero time during the week. You know what? I love playing, and I'm trying to get my kids in so that I can engage with them, and play like a Mario game together or something.
Yeah.
And I allow myself to be Aaron. I'm not
Yeah.
Aaron who CEO of Mindset Capital, or I invest this, or I'm Aaron that said this publicly, and if it's wrong, my world is shattered, you know?
Yeah.
And that's what it reminds me kind of every week. And I get this, and it's like the way I would describe it to people is it's not like, oh, you got to eat your broccoli, you got to turn off your phone, you got to, no, I get a vacation. I
Yep.
literally get a vacation every week. And I just ask, how isn't everybody doing this? Like, if you
Yeah.
can, and it may not be, you may not be able to do Saturday. Maybe you run a retail business or something and the weekends are busy. Do it Tuesday. I interview people that did like Mondays or Tuesdays and make it your own. Maybe it's not a whole day. Maybe that doesn't work for you. Maybe you just do the morning. Maybe it's just Sunday morning for you. But it's amazing the trick because what all it really is like a mental hack, right? Like what's
Yep.
stopping me from turning on my phone or doing work? I just told myself, can't do it, Aaron. And then I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, okay. It's amazing because you think about all the stuff we want to accomplish and do, it's amazing when you tell yourself, oh, well, there's just this period, I'm not allowed to do it. You stop worrying about the stuff that you haven't accomplished. And it's endless. If you want this podcast to do really well and maybe it'll translate and you're going to be this big internet like TV star and you're the future Howard Stern of finance and all this stuff, endless, endless work. You'll never be able to fit in as many hours
Yeah.
in the day,
You know,
never
it's
be able to interview the people you want.
what's funny about you saying that and me hearing it out loud is I actually don't. I mean, I want this thing to be successful, but the reason that I do this, there are a couple financially. What I would really like to do is create a stream of income. Like with interest rates where they are, I just don't have enough capital to take care of my mom in the way that I would like to. And I would like to figure out a way to be able to do that for her because she's come a long way in her life and she hustles her ass off and she deserves that. The other thing that I like, I just love this stuff, man. I love talking to other investors. I could do it all day. So, I don't know. It's funny. The only thing that I don't like is I don't like. I mean, I do enjoy the attention. I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't enjoy the attention at some level. But there's also, honest, to be perfectly candid about it, there's a level of paranoia that's entering my brain that I don't like. Just kind of like, why are people engaging with me? What are people are people trying to get something from me? Like, and I don't like that part.
I'm trying to
of
get you
it.
to observe the Sabbath. I'm going to take advantage of you.
Well, dude, the thing that's nice about you is I reached out to you, right?
Yeah. But it was
But like,
secret. I hooked you
that's
with
right.
weed.
Yes,
With
yes,
weed.
that's right. Yes, thank you.
Next
You
thing
did a
you
very
know,
good
you're taking
job.
to the Sabbath. You thought you were going to talk about cannabis. No,
That's
no,
right.
no.
That's right. There are nodes to connect with me, and one of the nodes is a common interest in marijuana. No, but it's weird, right? I don't know. In certain ways, the bigger my world is getting, the smaller it's getting. There's a level of trust that I'm pulling back a little bit at times, and I hope that that's something that I learn how to deal with because it's not.
Well,
That's
take a
not an element
space.
that I think is good.
Create a time and space where you're just you.
Yeah.
You're just you. And one of the worst things that may happen to you is you actually do become super successful.
Yeah.
And how are you going to remind yourself that you're just Bill and why you're really doing this?
Yeah.
And to just
I'm pretty
ask
good at
yourself,
making fun of myself, which helps.
no, but not just making fun of yourself, just making sure that you're doing what you want to do. You're spending time with the people you want to spend time with,
Yeah.
and that you have space just for you.
Yeah. No doubt. Well, man, I'm going to let you get back to your part of your 24/6 lifestyle, but I appreciate the conversation that we had, and I hope the listeners did too. And if they don't, at least two of the listeners will, because I'm going to listen, and I think you're going to listen. So,
Yeah, this has been really great. And if you ever want to talk more, I would love to be on again. This has been a
oh
lot
man,
of fun.
that's my plan on this thing is to have like, I don't view this as, oh, a guest stop by and that's like the only time they're coming. I plan on like having people back. So I hope you will come back and I look forward to it.
Awesome.
All right, man. Take care of yourself.
Okay. Thank you.